Theodore Bundy. He's one of America's most well-known serial killers along the West Coast. His killings during the 1970s took the lives of over 30 women. He was also known as a necrophile. This makes him one of America's most notorious serial killers. But I don't want to start at his killings. In the beginning of his life, things were already strange. He was born out of wedlock, which made his grandparents extremely unhappy. And so they told him that his mom was actually his sister and adopted him legally. Soon enough, when his mom was old enough to actually raise Ted and move out of the house, they eventually told him the truth about his mother. Throughout his childhood, he was known to be kind of weird, as you would put it. By the age of 3, he was interested in knives, and in his teen years, he was known to be a peeper and peep in people's windows and also steal things from neighbors just because he wanted them. Eventually, once he graduated high school, he got a degree in psychology and moved out to the West Coast. That's when his killings really began to get their start. It seemed that the killings would follow Ted wherever he went, but nobody really seemed to notice, and girls just kept disappearing like out of thin air. And eventually, his longtime girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, called the police because she felt things were suspicious. Ted had had meat cleavers in his cars and other items that would be used in killings. But the police ignored her first call. They didn't think that Ted fit the profile of the serial killer they were looking for. Eventually, things got more and more suspicious towards Ted, and eventually, she called one more time, and they thought that he was suspicious enough. So they arrested him for the kidnapping and killing of one woman. During his time in prison waiting on his trial, he escaped prison twice, which I think is extremely interesting. During his first escape, he escaped out of a prison library window while studying for his trial. Eventually, he hopped out of this window and evaded the police for 8 hours. But I don't exactly find his first escape that wowing. During his second escape, though, he managed to lose 30 pounds and climb out of a prison cell through a hole that he had created. Eventually, he had escaped out and was gone 15 hours before the police had even noticed, giving him a huge head start. This led him to drive to Florida and eventually start killing in Florida State University, according to biography.com. These killings were extremely brutal. Ted was eventually pulled over a couple hours later afterwards, with blood on his clothes and items used in the killing in the back. He was arrested and sentenced to prison in Florida. During his trial, Edward Kohart, the judge in Bundy's trial, once described him as extremely wicked, shockingly vile, and evil, which I think perfectly describes him and his killings. I think he was an evil man, but what really interests me is how he was able to be so manipulative. The difference between Ted Bundy and any normal serial killer was his charming ways. Psychology today calls it the Bundy effect. I think his first ploy that he used was that he was extremely attractive. That's how he got women to trust him. Not only that, but when you think of a serial killer, you think of somebody who's rough looking, doesn't seem normal, but Ted looked like a normal guy. When you looked at him, you didn't think serial killer, necrophile. Second of all, Ted was incredibly smart. Not only was he book smart, but he knew how to read people's emotions and recreate them. He continued to do this throughout his trial and with different girlfriends in his life. Lastly, Bundy used Carol Boone and the media to seem even more normal. He knew that the media just fed off of his trial, and he loved it. He gave them exactly what they wanted, weird, whack answers. Not to mention, he ended up having a child with a woman while he was in prison. All of this led to the known Bundy effect. Charles Manson has used this Bundy effect. It's the ability to create emotions so lifelike that people can't tell that your true intentions. Bundy was an incredibly smart man and worked hard to seem like the perfect guy. But behind that, there was a truth. He was a serial killer. He was a necrophile. He was extremely wicked and shockingly evil. No matter how hard he worked to try and convince people of his charming ways, it didn't truly matter. Because you see, Ted Bundy was still convicted in July of 1979. He was sentenced to the electric chair, and about 9 years later, he was killed in the electric chair called Old Sparky, according to biography.com. The day of his execution, there were fireworks outside of the prison, and people celebrated and enjoyed because a horrible man was put away and would never kill again.